Have a number of organizations that we partner with for the Sarasota Film Festival and various activities of it. And one of the ones that we're most proud of and most excited about going forward is our partnership with the Screenwriters Colony. I'm going to let Lydia tell you a little bit about how wonderful the Screenwriters Colony is and all the things they do. Just know that I co-sign everything she says about how wonderful it is. It's not just the inside scoop, or not just the inside view of it. And so I'm going to sort of hand the keys over to Lydia, but not before I tell you that on stage with me are Lydia Cavallo of the Screenwriters Colony, Jason Kim, alum of the Screenwriters Colony, and I'll let Lydia tell you some of his credits. I think he's worked on a show that maybe you might have heard of before. Veena Sood, who has a film at the festival here and has worked on another show that I think you might have heard of before. And Ben Robbins, whose list of projects he's worked on is about this long, and is also with the Screenwriters Colony. So thank you all so much for being here. And please, if you have a good time at these panels, please spread the word and tell your friends about them. You know, this is only the second year that we've really done an intense slate of panels, and we're still trying to kind of get the word out to the community about how fun and informative they are. So do us a favor and spread the word, if you would. So without further ado, Lydia Cavallo.
Thank you. All right. I'm told to eat the mic. Thanks, Michael. And on behalf of Screenwriters Colony, thanks to everybody at the Sarasota Film Festival for having us. Quickly, what we do are residency and mentorship programs for writers, primarily on Nantucket. So we bring writers out for the feature film writers out for the entire month of October, and on the weekends we bring mentors out to workshop scripts with them, which is really awesome.
It's the best.
Yeah, as Michael has signed off on. And we're growing and moving into TV writing programs and also writing for virtual reality coming this summer. So your very own Mark Familio has been super supportive in helping us to expand. So thanks for having us, and so excited to be here with these guys. And I could give a brief rundown of their bios, but I think it might be nicer to hear from each of you. So in addition to the highlights, maybe you can take us through a little tour of your history. You actually come from a diverse range of backgrounds. We've got journalism and distribution and playwriting. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you came to the careers that you have now and all the shows that you worked on that we might reference in this conversation.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm Jason Kim. So I am a playwright by trade. I went to school and I got an MFA in playwriting. And since that time, I have written a few plays and written more TV. My first job out of graduate school was on a short-lived but wonderful show, which I loved, called Grace Point, on Fox. And then since that time, I've been writing for Girls. This is my third season writing on Girls. We're working on season 6 at the moment.
My name is Veena Sood. I went to undergrad in New York. I worked for many years as a print journalist and a radio journalist. I was not a very good journalist because I kept making stuff up. So I decided I probably should go back to my first love, which was fiction writing, which I did. Went to grad school at NYU, then got out and got a job doing reality television for a year. Decided that was not for me, and got into a writing program in Los Angeles, a Disney ABC writing program. Got my first staff job on a show called Push Nevada. Then when that shut down, I got on a show called Cold Case, and I was on that show for 5 years. I ran it for 2 years, and then I created a show called The Killing on AMC and Netflix. And I'm really happy to be here.
Hi, I'm Ben Robbins. I am, in addition to my writing career, I'm also senior creative director of the Screen Artist Colony. Have been involved with it for a long time, and it's a wonderful program that's brought a lot of writers, has really helped launch a lot of writers' careers. I'm actually, similarly to you, was in nonfiction and wanted to make stuff up, and was always curious what happened to the people when they went home and what their inner lives were like. I worked in documentary for a long time, and then transitioned out of that, worked on a show called Final Witness on ABC that was sort of a mashup of documentary and scripted, a true crime show that was about telling true crime murder stories from the perspective of the victim, looking back from the grave. And then most recently I wrote the Bernie Madoff miniseries with Richard Dreyfuss that was on a couple months ago. This crowd maybe has has some connections to the Madoff.
Well, it sounds like you have a lot of fans here, and I'm certainly a huge fan of all of your work. Can you tell us if there was a point in your life, back in childhood or maybe in college or possibly much more recently, where you realized that not only did you love to write and that you were good at it, but that you wanted to make a career of it? Can you pinpoint the moment where you decided that this was going to be your life's work, to be a writer?
I think that's a great question. Sure. When I was in college, I had a weird 3-week stint at the hospital. So I remember, I think it was sophomore year of college as an undergrad, and I felt very ill. And so I went to the school, I went to Columbia, and I went to the school, like doctor, whatever, health center, and I told this person I have a raging headache and a stiff neck, and he gave me some Advil and told me to go boil some water and waft the steam towards my face. And I was like, that's great, but I don't have time to give myself a facial. It's finals week. And then I ended up that same day having like a crazy 5-minute seizure at this newspaper party, and was hospitalized for 3 weeks with like a very strange case of meningitis, which they didn't figure out until like week 2.5 into it. At which point they told me there's nothing we could do for you, and I was like, great, thank you. So I was born and raised in Seoul, and until that time I think I was like a pre-med or like no, I was a pre-law major, and I had intended to go to law school immediately following undergrad and be like the very good immigrant that I was supposed to be. And when I got sick, I was like, well, F that. Not going to do that. And so I'm determined I was always sort of a closeted writer, and I determined to be a real writer, and then I didn't do that for another like 4 or 5 years until I was 25. And I went to journalism like you guys. I worked at the New Yorker for 2 years, and it was great, but it was a terrible fit for me. But yeah, that was when I decided I should try it for real.
I love that writing came out of a sickness for
did,
you.
Yeah.
It is a
sickness.
sickness.
It is a deep sickness, yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I always knew I was a writer. I mean, I was writing. I remember the very first thing I wrote, and I was a young girl. I was around, I think, 7 or 8, and I was obsessed with the notion of a pony dying. And it was the very first line was, "I died today," and I think it was a precursor to how dark my heart is, because I mean, like, what 8-year-old does that? You know, it was weird, but it was something that just felt very natural, and I was a quiet, shy child, and so that was the only way I could express myself was on the page. But dreams die, and I was very discouraged in terms of going into screenwriting, and I wanted to be the good immigrant daughter, even though I was not pre-med or pre-law. And I ended up, when I was right after college, I was pregnant, and I decided that I was going to live a practical life, and that meant taking a job at a very practical place that would hire me, which was automatic data processing, ADP. And all I would do all day long is sit there and type in computer manual instructions. And that was going to be my life because they gave me health insurance. I could take care of my son, and this is the only way I could do it. And within about a month, because writing and typing in computer manual instructions don't take a lot of time. And I noticed in office environments, people it was very interesting. People actually work like a third of the time, and then 2/3 of the time everyone's gossiping and running around and flirting with each other, at least at ADP. And I took that time actually to just write. You know, I was like, wow, this is a great job. I just have to work 2 hours really hard, and then I can spend, the rest of the day actually writing my novel. And it got to the point where all of a sudden one day I just said, I can't not do this. I can't, I'll always be finding that job where I'm sitting in some room trying to not do the job so I can do my writing. So why not just go for it? If I fail, I fail, but I have to at least try. So that's when I knew.
And what was the very next thing you did once you had that realization?
The very next thing was I went into journalism. Mm-hmm. And I was very bad at that.
Yeah, I think I knew pretty early on, too. I remember when I was like 7, I think, or 6 or 7, there was this magazine called Stone Soup. I don't know if it exists anymore, but it's like a kids magazine, and you could write book reviews. They had kids write book reviews, and I sent one in, and they published it. And I remember getting the issue, and they came in this manila envelope, and there was my name, and this, little, I like the story because the knight killed the dragon, but it was such a thrill. I mean, it is. Look, I think there's a very ego-driven part of writing, but there's also a selfless part, which is to connect with other people. And I think just that thrill of that sense of, oh my gosh, my thoughts are going to reach other people I don't know. And then I think for a long time I wanted to be a journalist, and then kind of caught the film bug. Thought I wanted to direct like a lot of people. And that carried me through. I got a job in distribution in New York, and I remember having a couple of films. It was at a great company called October Films that put out a lot of indie films in the 90s. And there were 2 things at that job that sort of made me realize I had to just go for it and be a writer. One was that there would always be these great filmmakers coming in, David Lynch, Todd Solondz, who we were working with, and I was always like, wait, I'm on the wrong side of this, and why am I talking about how we're going to market their films or whether we're going to buy them? I just want to talk to them about ideas and story. And then the other was just the elevator, and it was a great company with great people, and was an amazing job. I'm still very close to a lot of those people, but I just remember getting in the elevator every morning and just thinking like, this can't be right. This can't be what I just do every day. No, well, I like elevators, so it's just not the same elevator every day. And then I realized I wasn't a director. I did a couple of shorts and just felt like, no, I don't. I think you're allowed to keep control longer as a writer and make fewer sacrifices, although then the irony in television is that as a writer then you're supposed to become a showrunner, which is sort of more director than director, so which you can speak of more, I'm sure, but yeah, that's
So what was the next thing that you did once you had that realization, the elevator? How did you jumpstart your career from that moment?
I had a friend who was working for a guy who was, how can I put this delicately? He was married to an actress, and he needed to justify his existence. So he liked to call himself a filmmaker, but he didn't have any real talents. He was a good schmoozer, but he didn't have any real talents there. So he hired young people to do documentary stuff for him, so he could call himself a documentary filmmaker, which was a great opportunity. So my friend and I produced a bunch of A&E biographies and investigative reports and stuff for him. Yeah, from there, one thing led to the next.
So you guys are all writers in heart and soul, and you found yourself here in TV. Did you watch a lot of TV when you were growing up?
No. I wasn't. I lived in one of those like half hour of PBS a week households. You know, it was like classical music and tofu, and TV in McDonald's will rot your brain. So of course now I work in TV. I don't eat McDonald's though, but I hate tofu.
I didn't really watch a lot of TV either. I think I watched Saved by the Bell, but in Seoul, dubbed over in Korean. Because I remember watching it distinctly, and like the mouths were not in sync, and I was like, that is not what they're saying. And I knew that as a child. And then when I moved to the US, I think I watched a lot of Disney movies, actually, so that I could teach myself English. I remember watching Aladdin over and over again.
How old were you?
I was 10. And so I remember watching Aladdin over and over and over again, just trying to memorize what he was saying and trying to figure out, like, by context, oh, he needs bread because he's hungry or something like that. But that was actually interesting to watch because Disney gives you, like, a real sense of narrative. And so I think I have a lot of sort of story backbones from watching a lot of Disney movies, obsessively as a child.
I actually did watch a lot of television, and I grew up in one of those, the opposite. It was just like, hey, The Exorcist is on, you're 4 years old, let's watch it. My parents actually brought me to The Exorcist when I was a small child, and my brother was traumatized for life because he was younger than me. But we would watch Hitchcock, we would watch MASH, we would watch NYPD Blue, and it was definitely through MASH and NYPD that I started to realize that these incredible stories could be told, and I wanted to do that. So, and then also where I lived in Ohio, the PBS channel, for some reason, was allowed to show uncensored stuff. So they showed The Deer Hunter with everything.
Wow.
They showed Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet with nudity, which was, I don't think it's ever been seen except probably originally in the theater. Back in the day. So it was amazing that, TV, the television set, the big blocky television set brought me so much of that.
And you were always attracted to the darker, edgier material. Mm-hmm.
Always, even though now
it's not a surprise.
All I watch is comedy and The Real Housewives.
Your microphone is off.
Oh, sorry.
Well, let's get into the meat of talking about your creative process. So maybe, Vina, we can start with you. You took something that was critically acclaimed already, an existing piece of work, the Danish series. I'm not going to try to say the name. I've never heard it said out loud.
Forbrydelsen.
Forbrydelsen, okay.
You actually did a better job than I did.
And made something incredibly new and fresh and very, very much your own. Can you take us inside a little bit and talk about the process of developing that work from a practical standpoint? How did you get the job? How did you land it? And then what was important to you about adapting that
Yeah,
piece?
I mean, in a nutshell, basically, I had done 5 years of network television, looking to do cable, really wanting to get into that space. I had been out pitching another very dark cop show, and my agent said, there is this Danish format called The Killing. The minute I heard the name, I was deeply intrigued. And the minute I saw the show, I knew I had to somehow wrap myself around it and bring it to American television. The original was so smart, the whole idea of serialized storytelling in the genre was deeply appealing to me. The fact that the female lead was smart and strong and, was just very kind of grounded and wore boots and, wore her hair in a ponytail and didn't wear makeup was great because I'd spent a lot of time with female cops and that's the reality, because they have to chase bad guys, so they don't wear the high heels that you see on television. And so I fell in love with it pretty quickly, and it was a very fast process because the format existed, the executives at AMC could then look at it and imagine it as an American television show versus when you go out to pitch something, you're pitching it from scratch and you really have to have visual aids and just do all this other stuff. The existing format did that work for me. And in terms of adapting, it was obviously the very first thing I adapted. And I quickly realized that, and I think it's just an instinct for us as writers, that I could either transcribe it, which I didn't want to do, or I had to live inside the characters myself and take the bones and the intent of a lot of the Danish what the Danish creator had done, but really understand the character for me. So even when we had the writers' room, when the writers first got together in television, there's the room. They didn't watch the TV show, the Danish show, right away. That was going to be on the list, but that wasn't the first thing on the list. It was really important that we all kind of, as creative people, tried to just understand what it might look like to look at murder in a very different way than we had before on television, or at least in many years on television. So we did things like, we went to the morgue. Half the room were parents, including myself. You know, we met parents who had lost their children and had some incredible discussions with them. We had to get our hearts kind of into the place before we looked at kind of, you know, the exoskeleton of this thing. And then we pulled all the great things from the Danish series, and what we did not want to use, we didn't. We just kind of went in our own direction.
Yeah, I'm not surprised at all to hear that you did that research on the family loss, because that is just so visceral and real and brutal as a parent. You know, there's so many details and layers to that work that just are really amazingly compelling. Ben, let's move to you. So how is it different developing a nonfiction piece, the epic story of one of the most notorious true crime cons in history? What was your process like? How did you get the job? How did you land the Madoff gig? What was it about your voice that you think landed you that job? And then what was your process for developing the miniseries?
Sure. Is this work? Yeah, it's kind of, well, it wants to work, but then it doesn't. Well, this one works better. So, how did I get the job? I pitched on it. There was an executive. They wanted to make it, so it wasn't the kind of thing where I came in and sold them the idea, which is more often the case for how writers get their stuff made. They knew they wanted to do Madoff. Brian Ross, who's one of their correspondents, had done a lot of reporting on the scandal when it broke, and he wrote a book about it, so they had that nominally as the property that the writer would adapt. And they just wanted a take on it. There was an executive who'd read a feature script of mine that was about another con man, actually the same con man who, it's the same story that ended up becoming American Hustle, which we were putting together at the same time as they were, and they beat us to the punch, obviously. So that script went away, but got me the Madoff job because this guy liked my voice there, and I think he thought I had a good voice for angry old Jews, I guess. No, I mean, which is sort of not true, but sort of true at the same time. It was, God, I don't know. I think it was, you know, I often find that when you're pitching something, the takes that work are really just the simplest part that you have, and for me it was just like, I think we should be inside Bernie's head as much as possible during this, and there were all kinds of other things, but I think they really latched onto that and liked that. Then as far as telling the story, you know, lots of people ask me, did you meet Bernie? Did you talk to people who lost money? And the thing is, this story is one of the most covered stories of the last century. So my job was really actually weeding out information much more than, you know, I did a ton of research, but then it was about whittling it down. I think something that a lot of people don't know until they become practitioners, and when you look at a script, is actually how condensed it is. You know, people talk about adapting novels and stuff. If you adapt a novel, you know, you're really whittling it down to a short story. And so that was sort of the biggest challenge there, even though we had 4 hours, or, you know, 168 minutes of network TV. It's a huge, sprawling story, so sort of wrestling it became the biggest challenge.
Yeah, the structure that you came up with is really effective. Let me ask you something about the voice of Madoff. I guess before I saw your piece, I probably assumed that Bernie Madoff was some evil genius psychopath, you know, with a number crunching, John Nash, Beautiful Mind scenario.
Yeah.
And after I watched the miniseries, I realized that that wasn't what allowed him to, you know, be able to pull off this epic con, that it was really that he was so endearing and charming. and Uncle Bernie, and it seemed like Richard Dreyfuss, really conveyed that beautifully, but it's obviously in the script. I mean, that's your writing. So how did you nail the voice of Uncle Bernie, and how did you come to understand what that was? Was it in the book? Was that in the source? If you didn't meet him?
I think to some extent it's maybe not the real Uncle Bernie. I think your job when you're adapting something is to sort of create your version that you believe, and as Vina was saying about adapting the Danish thing, really living in that character. I think there were a couple of insights I felt like I had into Bernie that were guiding lights for me. I felt like the big mistake people made about Bernie was thinking that he was motivated by greed. He's become this icon of greed, but he had plenty of money from his legitimate business, and I really was like, no, this guy was motivated by admiration. He wanted people to say, oh, Bernie, thank you. Because of you, my grandchildren go to. He wanted to be the Macher, and so that sort of led to that voice, and I think. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think the simplicity of the con also, as you brought up, was that he's really most con men are, the word comes from confidence man. You give people confidence, and that's really more of a psychology 101 thing than it is a finance thing. So he just, the sense that, don't ask questions, and the goose with the golden golden leg, I like that. One golden leg and one chicken leg. There were pieces that just sort of came together, and it was actually a really big blessing that it wasn't a complicated financial scam, because that's really hard to dramatize, that sort of stuff. So just being like, they never actually made a single trade, they're just faking statements, made for a lot of humor and fun things to play with there.
Yeah, amazing. So Jason, you came into a series in a world that was already established, characters were already developed. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about how you got the gig, how you landed on Girls.
Sure. So it's a pretty boring story, actually. A spot opened up, and my agent submitted a play that I had written, this very strange, dark, dramatic play that I'd written years before that, and the creatives read it, and they liked it, and so we met, and then I ended up going into season 4 pretty much, I think, a week or two later.
Wow.
So I had to pick up and go out to LA for a little bit, which was great. And so that's sort of how it happened on the surface, I think. But I think on their side, they were looking for a new writer. I think a lot of rooms do that after they've gone through about 2 or 3 seasons. I think they were looking for a certain kind of voice, and for whatever reason, there's no reason why I should have the job over anybody else, but I just happened to be there at the right time.
Were you a Girls fan? Were you
absolutely.
You watched every
yeah.
week? So
yeah, I'd been living in Brooklyn before that for about 4 years, and I'd been in New York total for about 8. So I was absolutely, from the very start, I was really riveted in watching the show.
So other than the fact that you're awesome and that your writing is amazing, and I know that because I've seen it, so I can speak with some authority, what was it, can you say, about the play? Like, what was it about the voice that spoke to Lena and Jenny, I assume?
Oh, I don't know. That's a greght question for them. I have no idea. I think, well, maybe I can tell you a little bit about the play. The play was this very strange 90-minute drama primarily about a young male gay couple living in New York. It was very dark, and they're basically cruel to one another for 90 pages. And then that's it. It's great work of theater, guys. So that was the play.
Tone.
Yeah, and I remember hearing that I got the job and thinking like, oh shit, what are they gonna do when they find out that I'm not funny? It was a nightmare. But it was a very dramatic piece of writing. It had moments of levity, but I think the thing that I could say about the writing is that that piece in particular is very young. And it feels very authentically mine. Like I'm not trying to do anything else. It just feels very much like my voice. And I think maybe if I could, hypothesized that's what they responded to.
So now that you're 2 seasons in, is there a specific character that you really love to write for most of all? Is there something that's sort of
sure.
Your role in the writer's room?
I love everybody equally, but if someone were to put a gun to my head, I find myself caring a lot for Elijah on the show because I think we're both gay men living in New York, and you actually don't see a lot of young gay men on television. And Looking was great. Unfortunately, it doesn't exist anymore. But I think it's really hard to find those kind of characters, and so I always try to push him forward a little bit.
Yeah, I can see that, knowing you. Since we're talking specifically about characters, Vina, you're renowned for, these incredibly strong and complex and usually deeply flawed, but very real women characters. And lots been said about that already. But I would like to ask you about somebody else, and that's the character of Detective Holder, Joel Kinnaman's character. Did he have a counterpart in the Danish series that had a similar vibe, or did you develop, where did he come from? He's so fun. I could watch him all day.
There was a Danish version of Holder, tall and blonde and thin, a Danish dude. But Joel is Swedish. But the character was not my most favorite character from the Danish original. He was very old school sexist, and so always talking about her period and not trusting her because she was a woman, and it felt like that was swimming in territory that maybe was not that interesting, at least not to me. What I was interested in was a working relationship between a man and a woman who seem like polar opposites, because he's all kind of slovenly and all over the place, and he says whatever he thinks, and she's like wound so tightly and shows nothing. But at heart, both these people are the same animal. They're both addicted to the need to know something. So Joel was a complete lucky find. We had looked high and low for him, for the character of Holder. He's so specific that we were not finding him anywhere. And literally looking Canada, Australia, LA, New York. And finally, my casting agent said, there's a Swedish guy, he's the Brad Pitt of Sweden, and he put himself on tape, so here it is, check it out. So I clicked my computer link on a Sunday morning, and the minute it opened up, here was this gangly guy who looked exactly very similar to what I imagined Holder. He was very kind of, he's a Brad Pitt of Sweden, so he was very good looking, but he was wearing a t-shirt and he had all these tats. And he came in and he did a scene. There's a scene in the pilot where the two characters meet for the first time, and it's emblematic of their personalities. So Sarah's cleaning her desk, and she's got her files perfectly put in the box to go away, and Holder comes in with his box with stuff falling out of it, and he hits her box, and it falls to the ground. The scene, when it was originally written, did not have him bumping into her stuff and knocking it over. The actor himself did it by accident. So in that audition tape, here comes Joel, he's like a lanky puppy, and he accidentally hits the box on the table. And he's like, oh, no, man, I'm sorry, man. And the guy he's reading with is like, no, it's okay. And the improv that he did around it, all of a sudden it was like, this is the guy. This is the guy. This is what this man does in her world. He comes in and just messes shit up. And so Joel, it was perfect. And so, again, we had been looking for him for so long. So, my God, this is him. He had just been in the U.S. for, I think, 3 months. He didn't have a car. And he's trying to find his way. And so he comes to there's this thing in television called the network read, where the actors that you like have to go in front of the network and then get, they kind of like them or don't. So Joel showed up, and again, very good-looking man, Brad Pitt is Sweden, and he's wearing an Armani suit. So he does not look like an undercover, dirty cop. And
not our Holder.
Right. And so Patty Jenkins, the director, and I were like, oh, fuck, And so he goes and he reads in front of the network, and they're like, this guy just looks like he walked out of an ad. Like, he doesn't look like a cop. So he said, Joel, don't take a bath. You know, we pulled him aside. We got him to come back in the next day. Don't take a bath. Wear that T-shirt with your tats, and as much as possible, don't look good, dude. Don't do that thing with your hair. Just let it go and look. Yeah, don't like do that. And so he came back the next day, and he did look not so great. And then he really got into it. You know, he slept in his clothes before the pilot. You know, the makeup people were amazing. They created all that kind of the dark stuff under his eyes. And he lost weight for the role, you know, when we started shooting it. So, yeah, he was a find. It was interesting.
Had he done Snabacash yet at that point?
He had done Snabacash,
yeah. Okay. Yeah, he's so great in that.
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah.
Yeah, an instant classic, and so much of his dialogue are, you know, classic lines. It seems like you must have had a lot of fun writing him.
Yeah, no, that was one of the funnest things to do Joelisms on the show in the writers' room.
How much had you written
Yovina.
when you guys started shooting? Were you writing and shooting at the same time?
We were, yeah. So I mean, that's the great thing, you know, about television is that you can adjust to the actor and you can kind of go with the flow of their natural way of speaking too.
Mm-hmm. Well, you guys are being so generous about your creative process. I would love to ask you to get even more specific and share with us, if you can and will, a favorite piece of writing, something that you're incredibly proud of, either a scene or a full episode or even some dialogue, and just pull back the curtain a little bit on how that came about, you know, what the inception was and what the process of writing this thing that you feel like really, you know, that you nailed as a writer. Was it a flow, you know, come out in a stream, or was it an arduous process of revision after revision? If you can give us an example, I think that would be really awesome to hear.
I don't know about you guys, but nothing ever comes out in a flow for me. I hear about that, writers being like, it just came out of me, and the next day, I'm like, no, I just have to, like, it's that big block of wood, and you just keep banging your head against it, hoping that your head works as a chisel or something. For me, you know, it's funny. There's one of my favorite scenes I wrote for Madoff didn't end up making it into the movie. We didn't even end up shooting it. It was going to be the beginning. Richard Dreyfuss loved it and really fought for it, and he can be pretty passionate when he gets going and yelling at the ABC suits for being cowards and why won't you? But it was I read this anecdote that I really liked somewhere. I don't remember where in all the research, but about Richard Dreyfuss saying that on 9/11, Bernie Madoff saying that on 9/11 he felt incredible relief because he was so deep into the scam at that point that he knew the only way he could get out was by being discovered and going to jail or dying. And this was the best case scenario because he's sitting there thinking, you know, the world's going to end. So I wrote this scene it was going to be the opening. You saw sort of Bernie's famous hair. You're looking from the back of his head, and he's on his penthouse deck looking south at the burning Twin Towers. And I don't know, for those of you who've seen it, it's the whole miniseries is very voiceover driven. And so you heard him saying, you know, so this is how it ends. I die, my family dies, the world ends, and I get away with it. And there's a little smile at the end, and Ruth is panicking, looking for the kids and stuff. And it just, I think what I liked so much about that was, you know, I don't know if you guys will agree with me, but my favorite scenes either that I write or that I see are usually the ones that are doing 3 or 4 things at the same time that are, you have to be emotionally honest first, but I liked the idea that it sort of put the Bernie story in the context of 9/11. I feel like the 2008 financial crash was sort of a bookend to 9/11 in a certain way of the Bush years. And also just sort of set him apart from the rest of humanity. I mean, that's the thing everybody always asks, you know, how could he do this? How could you look at your friends and family and everybody you know and be lying to them and stealing from them? And I have to say, I never really figured out the answer to that. I just, he's a psychopath on some level, except that admiration piece. And just this was the idea that everybody else in the world would be so panicked and he could feel relief in that moment was actually really moving to me. It was just, it was a clever little turn too, but I just felt like, wow, what an island to be on as a human being, to have your feelings so distorted.
And did it take a lot of drafts to get to where you wanted to be with that?
No, that one wasn't a ton of
drafts. You did
flow. Reasonably, but it's the oldest adage, the writing is rewriting thing. I think it's like, I'm very suspicious of when I write a scene and I'm like, wow, I'm awesome. It's usually gonna suck. It's funny, it's just like, I don't know if other people have this, but it's just, you sort of get so deeply immersed that you kind of lose a sense. And then there are other times when I'll be just, oh my God, I have to get from point C to point F. So just write scene D and scene E and just, these are just, and then there's actually something really working there. So it's a spooky art, and I think you don't have a lot of, I don't have a lot of sense of what's working or not. A lot of the time. I try not to say that in public much. I don't say that in pitch meetings.
What about you guys?
So I co-wrote an episode last year, 2 years ago, with Murray Miller, who's one of our executive producers. And I think it's episode 7 in season 4. And this scene takes place in a laundromat, and it's Hannah and this new character that we got introduced to during season 4, named Mimi Rose, who is Adam Driver's new girlfriend. And so the entire season, the two of them have been sort of duking it out over Adam, and it all sort of comes to a head when they're stuck in this laundromat together. Because this person got hit by a cab, and they've been asked by the cops to stick around in case they need to testify or give a statement. And the scene was interesting because they're sort of hanging out, and it feels like you're breaking a lot of TV rules. Like in TV, you're supposed to go in, have an objective, get out. Even in comedy, there's supposed to be a turn. But this scene in particular, they were stuck in a laundromat, and they were just talking. And the arc of the scene is that by the end of the scene, they start the scene kind of hating each other, and by the end of it, they form some sort of connection, and they leave the laundromat with a different point of view of one another. And I thought that was very real, and I think that happens in real life, though rarely maybe. But that was just fun for me to write also as a playwright, just two people hanging out, talking, and seeing, and sort of really connecting and listening to one another.
I remember that episode. Is that the one that starts out with her as the substitute teacher?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And which, tell me if I'm wrong, but seems like such a classic Jason Kim contribution, the Sophocles and Oedipus as the first instance.
That was actually
of the
Murray Miller. That was
really?
not. That was so
you?
funny. Yeah. That was all Murray Miller. That amazing opening. Yeah.
It's a cool episode. How did you co-write that script? So that was your script.
Right.
For
I think
4.
With every writing pair, I think it depends. And I think in a lot of rooms I've been in, they say dealer's choice. So if you're paired up with another writer, you could do scene by scene, or one person may write the whole draft, and then the second person might do a rewrite, etc. But from what I remember, I think Murray and I split it down the middle, and so I wrote the second half and he wrote the first half. Yeah, and it worked out great. Yeah.
Cool. Vina?
Yeah, a similar episode for me. There's an episode in season 3 of the show where the detective, Sarah Linden, goes onto death row, and she thinks the man who's about to be executed that day, who she's put in prison, may have not committed the murder. So as they're waiting for a stay, as they're waiting for Holder, who's out in the world, to accumulate enough evidence to free this man, she has to spend the day basically having conversations with a man she thought was a sociopath, and now is starting to realize may not have done this crime. So for me, as someone who's not a playwright, but who really admires the form, and especially, the most compelling television for me was an episode that Tom Fontana wrote for Homicide called Three Men and Adina. Yeah, and that was when I saw that episode. Very briefly, that episode is about the two detectives in the box in the interview room with a man they think might have killed a child. And this child has been the obsession of one of the detectives for many seasons. So it's a very emotionally riveting, and they never leave that room. I think they show them having coffee and fighting, but for the most part, they're in a room for an entire episode of television. And especially for such a visual medium, it's a huge challenge. So I said, let me write a whole episode myself, where basically they're doing the same thing, but just two people having a conversation. So it was a huge challenge for me as a writer, as a TV writer, as a visual writer, to do that. And to really, as much as I love this notion of slow burn, which is take any story or any event in life and look at it as, I guess you would, an accident victim, just slow everything down and just see every moment, every turn, every expression. I'm very fascinated by that. I had to do that in my writing. I had to really, because I do like the slow burn in detective writing, but there still is a plot because there's a murder and there's a mystery and you have to find clue A, B, C. So there is some forward motion. And on this day, in this episode, there was almost zero forward motion. It was really it was uncomfortable, and I started to realize things about myself, and my gosh, I'm so much like Sarah, and she was uncomfortable being in the room with a guy, and being intimate and having to be real, having to reveal things about herself, as was he. And there was no happy ending to this episode because the stay did not come. They were not able to exonerate the guy. She failed, in other words, and he ends up getting hung at the end of the episode because that was his requested manner of death. And I have to say, it was one of my proudest moments, not only because it was such a challenge, but truly because everybody, the network, the studio, when we said she's not going to save him, she's going to fail, he's going to die, and who knows, the audience might be like, we hate you for letting this happen. We wanted it to be the truth of what happens on death row. So that was very, and it's odd to say, but I think within that episode, my favorite scene was the very last. It's odd to say for a writer because there was no dialogue. I think there was just guys saying, blah, blah, you're going to die, and nothing important or emotional. But the actors got to fully play. There was a woman watching a man die and a man getting ready for his death. And that was a scene I was very, very proud of, and was very, very difficult to shoot too.
Yeah.
It's funny you say that, Vina, because that's something people often, I don't know if you guys have this experience, but people often say like, oh, how can you be a writer? How can you think of all the things that people say, the dialogue, and everybody always focuses on the dialogue. And for me, great writing is about story. And so it doesn't surprise me to hear you say that. I feel like great dialogue with no story or no depth of character is, who cares?
Right, yeah. And actually, a lot of people don't think we write the dialogue. I think they think the actors make it up. Yeah.
Promoted by actors.
It's getting late, so I want to ask one more question before we open it up for you all to ask these guys something. But you alluded to this a little bit with the audience. You guys have written for network and cable and pay cable programs. Do you feel like you have any responsibility to consider your audience when you're writing, or do you remain true to your creative vision solely? Do you feel like you owe them anything?
I think I owe them a good story, and I don't think I know what a good story is, except for I can't poll the world. That it feels like everyone. It's so subjective. A good story is subjective. So the only thing that I can do is follow what I think might be a good story, and it might be difficult. It might not be great, and especially I think as a writer, the whole world doesn't like what you do anyway. You know, I think, or maybe it's just our brains. We just hear the criticism and we don't hear the praise ever. But I mean, I think in TV especially, you know, there is so many notes. There's a huge notes process. So, you know, you're already hearing from so many sources what they think about it, that it's almost like having, I think, especially in television, you're on a tiny little sailboat and you just got to keep it kind of going through, and everyone's notes are the waves, and probably it's helping you kind of get over the ocean, but it doesn't feel like it. But really, that is, you have to be your own compass. So I don't think I've ever felt, and I don't think any writer I know is like, I'm going to do what I want and I hate you. I think all of us want to tell a good story. We want, but good story is defined by who we are, you know.
I guess the second part to that would be, do you feel like you have to have a thicker skin in some way writing for TV than in feature film, because you know, you ostensibly need your audience to return week after week? No? No is fine too.
I mean, I think the notes process is, I mean, feature film, depending on who you're doing it for, but I think the notes process in TV, to me, is what you have to have a thick skin for, because, and it is the reason in some ways, kind of counterintuitively, that you do end up having to hew to your vision so closely. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think they're both, I think writing, look, these are expensive mediums. People, corporations, whoever it is, put a lot of money behind these visions, and they're business ventures, and so they have a right to protect their investment. And you know, as a creative on that, I think you can either rage against that or you can accept it. Yeah.
Jason, Girls has a rabid audience, and
we do, and I think you have to be responsible to your audience to a certain degree, and then you have to let it go, or else I think you could be trapped in that mindset, and I don't think that's good for anybody. But in terms of notes on the show, we don't really get a lot of notes. HBO is actually great about sort of letting creators do their thing, and they've been the best place to work, period, and incredibly generous and wonderful with sort of letting us have free reign. And that was very different for me, because I came from a network procedural where there were rounds and rounds and rounds of notes, just because that's sort of the lay of the land, but also I think maybe the show did require notes at a certain point, because we were doing an adaptation, and there were different people involved. So that was a big change for me. But
nice direction to go in.
Yeah, I mean, it was a big change, but I don't think all notes are bad, actually. I think maybe the trick about notes is that you have to figure out what you can take from it. Because I think, you know, it's hard when you have like 10 cooks in the kitchen and you know, 10 executives telling you, you know, this and that. But I think I can't even imagine what it feels like to be at the head of the table and like have to stay cool under pressure. I think it's much easier.
Conference calls, and then you can just press mute.
Just press mute. Yeah.
Pressing
the
mute.
Mute button is your friend. Yeah. There's a lot of mute buttoning going on on TV. Yeah.
Should we take some questions from the audience? Yeah.
I'm a writer. I've got 14 published novels. And I've got a film agent who's working on a couple of projects. Do you have any idea what the odds are to pitch a series of any kind to actually get produced? I don't know. I'm asking you. I wonder if there are figures.
I don't know. I think this is a pretty, I don't know anything about gambling, so I'm going to say this wrong. My husband knows gambling better than I, but I think I think odds really suck in this industry. They're really, it's a tough world. And I mean, I don't know what your process is, where you are in terms of selling a specific show. I think, I mean, I said it on a different panel, you know, this is about a very, 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 very long game in this industry, in television. And the good news is there's so many different platforms now that there is the desire and the need for content. The bad news is there's a ton of competition. as always.
Let me do a real quick follow-up. I've got a friend who actually is a screenwriter. He's never sold, he's never had anything produced, and he makes a damn good living. And he's been in the business for 20 years. And they keep buying his projects and they never make it. What's that all about?
Yeah, well, I think features and TV are a little different, and that's also a lot changed with the writer's strike 10 years ago, whenever that was. But there used to be a whole different financial incentive system for the studios to have deals with producers, and then the producers needed to have writers doing a lot of development, and so they would pay them to write a lot of scripts that didn't get made. That still happens. I have a friend who's exactly in the same position as your friend, makes a lot more money than me. But in TV, I think it's one of the nice things about working. I started out writing features and moved over to TV, but one of the nice things is you get a thumbs up or a thumbs down pretty quickly. So things which, you face a ton of rejection, but they rip the Band-Aid off. You take a pitch out, maybe you've written the pilot, maybe it's just the Bible or the pitch or something. Doesn't sell, it doesn't sell, and you're on to the next. Same thing, you turn in a pilot, if somebody hires you to do that, pretty quickly. I mean, these models are always changing, and now people are sometimes not even having you write a pilot. They're having you put together a room first to break the whole season, and then present that before they figure, oh, you can write the scenes, we want to know where the story's going to go. TV is, I think, most people who are making money in TV are selling, well, I don't know. I mean, people sell stuff and it doesn't get made the same way, but I don't know if you can do that quite as long in TV as you can in movies.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the collaborative process of the writer's room? I'm familiar with screenwriting is very kind of isolated, one for people, but my understanding is that television writing is much more collaborative. And can you talk about that process as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's an odd process because you're becoming the same person, right? Like you're spending so much time in the room. At least on my show, I like the room. I think it's a great place for ideas to be vetted pretty brutally. I don't know if Girls has a room.
It's a therapy room.
Okay, yeah, that too. I want therapy all day long from my friends, and drinking coffee and making jokes. But other than that, I think that what the room does is it does allow kind of, and again, depending on kind of, I think how the room is run, you have very smart people for the most part together, calling each other on your bad ideas and demanding more of each other. So, and again, if you're not fooling around half the day, which, when you're running a show, you're not fooling around. But when you're on staff, yeah, sometimes. And so you spend so much time together that you really, I found in my room, it starts out as a group of individuals with a lot of their own kind of opinions and politics, and they're competing with each other. And as the room kind of gets to know each other and grows together, becomes this really pretty amazing thing. It's really, and I've been very lucky, on my other show that I didn't create, to be in a very, very healthy room, because they're very unhealthy rooms too on television, where people are competing and they're being mean to each other and they're fucking each other over. Sorry, in-laws. I'm sorry. Yeah, so basically, when it's a healthy place, I think it's where we're our best, and we have therapy and it's really fun. And we're lonely people as it is, as writers. And so for a brief period of time, we get to be together with our own kind, and talk about the stuff we're interested in. And I think the key to that really has to be the senior writers and the showrunner have to be people who are not unhealthy, who really want the room to work, who really are collaborative people at heart, who are not about kind of pitting people against each other. And the minute I started to see any of that happening, I would really, nip it in the bud very quickly.
Oh, we've got a lot of questions. A very quick follow-up, though. What did you look for when you were hiring writers for your room?
I mean, in a nutshell, a lot of it is what you need. So I need someone who can talk Holder. I need someone who can, we're in the world of runaways. We hired a kid who was a runaway for that season. Whatever we need is kind of, and then also people you like, and you want to spend time with.
Right. Yeah. Do you want to say something about the writer's room, Jason? About
Sure. So I've been in, so before I was on Grace Point, I was assisting the showrunners on In Treatment, and I think every room that I've experienced has been radically different than the one before. So the In Treatment room, there were, I think, 4 or 5 writers, and they met, I believe, for 2 or 3 weeks, not a very long time, and then they went off separately to write their scripts and checked in with the showrunners every once in a while. And so the room sort of met and then diverged and spent the majority of its time separate. And then in the Grace Point room, it was just the 2 showrunners and me, and there were days when I was in the room with them, there were days when I wasn't, and that was sort of on a day-to-day, case-by-case basis. And then the girls' room is very different in that we're all in the room together. We start the room out in Los Angeles because our executive producer, Judd Apatow, is there, and our showrunner lives there, Jenny Connor, and we hang out, and we're able to break story, and we talk about whatever it is that we talk, our health issues, our parents, whatever it is that we need to talk about. And it's great. It's kind of like everything that I ever want from therapy, and more, because it's with your friends. And you have a shorthand now because you've been in this, in the same room with the same group of people for a number of years. And so I think every room is different. But I think what Vina said is absolutely true. I think the attitude of the room is very much top down, and luckily the girls' room is run by people who are like family, who are who are parents, who are incredibly generous with their time and our time, and really create an environment that's good for creativity, that's good for sharing these kinds of very personal stories.
So is someone assigned a script for that, or to write that episode, and then they're kind of like getting help, sort of?
That also sort of depends. I think, mostly on how the showrunner wants to run the room. So I think that's also even season by season, case by case basis. But in general, yeah, that's true. That's how it works.
So I'm told we have time for one more question, but there's 2 hands here. So let's ask them both, and we'll try to answer them quickly in the span of one question's answer time.
Hi guys, it's been great listening to you and learning from you. I guess the main question I have is about the inspiration for a lot of your material. Although listening to you, it sounds like you're writing on set a lot. So, I write, but I'm not a writer for TV. So I think of, for me, you mentioned this is on Nantucket. I'm actually from there. I think of that kind of process where you maybe go off and become a hermit and write, because that's how many writers do. So, and where do these inspirations come from? Just daily life, or where do you get your material from?
Does stuff from your life wind up
I think
on
from
the show,
everywhere,
Jason?
right? Like from everywhere. Nothing from my life has ever ended up on the show, guys. I think from everywhere, from your personal life, from the stories you hear from others, from things you've read. But I think for me, what's important is it has to feel true. And so no matter where it's from, I think if it doesn't feel real, then I think that's where you run into a wall. But I think for me, I take inspiration from everywhere. And I think that's generally true of most writers.
Yeah. Okay, let's do one more.
Mine was a real specific one for
Yeah.
me about Holder. Like, he's got such an interesting way of talking. Was that something that the character you came up with, you wrote it that way, and then were like, how can I get a Swedish guy to like he's kind of very American, like
Right.
on the streets, kind of
Yeah.
good way of talking a little bit.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so what happened was I lived in Jersey City for many years, so Holder was very much a Jersey City boy, but the story was set in Seattle, so I was like, okay, and that place where Eminem comes from, I always forget, Aberdeen. So I was like, okay, so Holder's got the Jersey City thing, but he's from Aberdeen, which is, very, very white. I know, we're writers, we're crazy. So it was like, okay, so I want these two things together in one person. This is really unique. I've never seen this before. And so Joel, though, in real life, he kind of does talk a little bit like Holder, but he hammed it up for the show. But yeah, I mean, again, like, it was just so lucky, you know, to find him.
All right, so we're out of time. I'm going to ask one final wrap-up question. We're in this golden age of television. There's, you know, proliferation of original content on so many channels and marquee talent and amazing writing. Where's it headed? What's next for TV?
I don't know. You tell me. God, that's a great question. I just got Hulu the other week. This is how little TV I watch, and I turned it on and I signed in and I freaked out and I shut down my laptop because there were like 1,000 shows. I was like, I don't know what to watch. I can't watch any of this, and I got really overwhelmed and just like ran out of the room. So I don't know. I think the thing that's interesting to me is that there seems to be a lot of niche shows now, and I think shows can be incredibly specific, which is exciting. Like, there's no need anymore to fill that network slot, and there's only 5 slots per year, and they have to meet a certain, you know, requirement, and they have to appeal to the widest range of people. I think you can have shows that are incredibly specific and narrow, and show a world that's very unusual, and that's what's exciting to me.
I think I agree. I mean, I think it's what the 70s were for film is what today is for television, you know, and partially motivated by kind of this proliferation of platforms and opportunities. In the same way, you know, the studio system kind of broke down the traditional studio system in the 70s, and thus all these smaller studios like UA were creating artist-motivated material. I think it's a great time for us as writers. It's exciting, more personal, less money, but you know, just you can tell any story now, which is great.
I don't know. Everybody will watch 30 minutes of PBS a week in the future, and that'll be. No, I have no. I mean, obviously, streaming is changing a ton, and binge watching, which I'm kind of against binge watching. One of the things I love about TV is that weekly excitement of, you know, I remember watching your show and just like being like, oh my God, what's going to happen next week? And my wife and I watched it every week when it aired. I mean, we did, you know, TiVo, so you could skip the commercials, but like literally starting at 30 minutes in so that we would know we would skip just the commercials and be able to watch. But like that was appointment viewing, and then the next day talking to your friends who were into the show. And, you know, I think there's the binging is a word for a reason. You know, you're not binging and purging. Nobody wants to think, you know, like that's, and I think you do kind of purge when you binge too, because like, it's just like, oh my God, House of Cards. It's, you know, and then you're through it, and there's the serialization of it is, nothing against House of Cards, just that's the show that people credit with, you know, really sort of making binging a huge thing. And I just think there's something, I love movies because you all go into a darkened room together and have that sort of going to church experience of sharing it with a stranger, and you don't get that with TV. But what you do get is that sort of collective, this is in the culture, this is something we all did, the water cooler idea. And I would hate to see that lost, because I think that's a real currency to TV.
I think it's hard to make TV into an event now, whereas before I think certain TV shows used to be events. Like, what did you watch last night's episode of The Sopranos? I think that's harder now.
Yeah. ABC would say that too because of the numbers on Madoff. So.
Well, thank you so much, you guys. All right. Thanks.
Thanks.